Okay. I want to scooter out. Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting us today. So I'm Iris, and this is Sean.
Hello, nice to meet you.
And yeah, we work for the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, and we both work in flood risk management. I think this talk follows on quite nicely from the one you had from Simon Ted last autumn, all about the weather. And we are all about flooding, which is a very real consequence of weather. So let's see how this moves forward. Not like this. Yes, there we go.
Okay, brilliant. So this is just a short slide, really, to set the scene. I'm not going to dive into the climate science too much, because I believe you've already had that in your talk from Simon. But as I say, it's more just to set the scene and show the trajectory that we are on in terms of climate change, particularly that bottom bar there. So that's showing the annual average temperatures in Scotland from 1884 to 2024. And you can see that there are different colours there. The colours are relative to the average temperatures for that time period. So anything that's blue is cooler than the average for that period, and anything that is red or orange is warmer than average. So you can probably see yourselves right up on the right-hand side there. In the last few decades, there is a stark band of red colours. So that really is showing that we've had many, many years, consecutive years of above average temperatures. I think about the turn of the millennium is probably sort of around about there somewhere. So you can really see from the year 2000 onwards, probably a bit earlier as well. We're really in a period of global warming. I thought before I got any further into what we're going to chat about today, I thought it would be useful just to explain what our flooding roles and responsibilities are at SEPA. It could be summarised into four quite nice themes. First of those is that we provide flood forecasting and warning service for Scotland. We're also the strategic flood risk management authority in Scotland. So we produce flood risk management plans at a national level. We work with local authorities, other responders as well, and Scottish Government to produce those plans. We also provide the national evidence on flooding. So we provide and publish things like our flood maps. We also produce something that's known as the National Flood Risk Assessment. That's every 6 years we update that, but again, that provides the national evidence on flooding that we use to inform those plans. We're also the National Hydrometric Authority in Scotland. So we have a network of over 770 gauges. So that's covering rain gauges, river gauges, and some tidal gauges as well. So quite a big network, and that provides real-time data for us to observe. We're also a key agency in the land use planning process. So what that means is that we get consulted by planning authorities on various different applications, and we provide advice on that, and I'll chat about that in a wee bit more detail. Before I move on, this graphic I've got here on the right-hand side, that is from our flood risk management plans. So we've got 14 in total, covers different parts of the country. But I thought it was just good to include because I think it sort of summarises the different roles that we've got quite well. So you can see we've got an existing community. There's a river setting there. It's also by the coast. So you can imagine it probably already is at risk of flooding. So we may have some actions. You can see further upstream in the river, there's some floodplain storage, some leaky barriers, tree planting as well. All of that is about to slow the flow coming down into the rivers. There may also be some hard defences in the existing communities, things like flood defences. It's very likely in a setting like that, we would actually have a flood warning scheme. So to be able to actually warn of flooding and forecast flooding. We're also likely in that sort of setting to have a gauge somewhere upstream so we can actually see what's happening with the river levels as well. And finally, you can see some new development just in the top right corner there, up on the hill, nice and away from the flood risk area. So that's what we like to see for new development. Just to chat about the planning stuff that we do in a little bit more detail. So as I've mentioned, we are a statutory consultee in the planning process. On average, we receive about 3,500 applications per year. A significant proportion of that is related to flooding. So we will be consulted on that and we will provide flood risk advice. There'll be a whole host of other topics and environmental factors that we also get consulted on, but flooding is one of the top ones. I also want to touch on one of the key policy documents that we have in Scotland. Some of you may be familiar with it, but if you're not, it's National Planning Framework 4, or NPF4 for short. So that sets out the planning policy goals for Scotland. There's various different policies in there, covering various different sort of environmental factors, and there's lots of different outcomes and policy intents. It came into force in February 2023, so it's just coming up for the 3-year anniversary, actually. Policy 22 specifically deals with flood risk, so that's a really important policy for us, looking at that from a planning perspective. And that really did mark a big change in how we view climate change. Prior to the publication of NPF4, climate change was only ever a consideration when we thought about flooding and flood risk. But the publication of NPF4 and Policy 22 means that flood risk now needs to, or it mandates that climate change needs to be considered in the assessment of flood risks. That is a really important change. The flood risk area, that's something that pops up in NPF4. It's essentially the floodplain. You can think of it like that, but it is the 0.5% annual exceedance probability event, which is a bit of a mouthful, but the easier way to think about that is the 1 in 200-year flood. So on average, flood that may occur roughly every 1 in 200 years. And of course, that now requires that climate change is added on when we're considering, or at least in a planning context. Policy 22 is really clear that avoidance of the flood risk area is required. There are some exceptions in there, things like water compatible uses, some essential infrastructure, and a couple other categories, but they've got another set of criteria that they need to address. Flood forecasting and warning. So the service that we provide, it's a 24/7 service, 365 days a year, where we work with the Met Office to be able to forecast and warn flooding in Scotland. The Met Office provides us with meteorological information on the situation, and we couple that with our own hydrometric network and forecasting capabilities to forecast where flooding is likely to occur, or potential flooding or expected flooding. We have over 40,000 registered customers to our Floodline service. The Floodline is the service that you can sign up for free to actually receive our flood warnings and flood alerts. Flood alerts, they cover quite large geographic regions. So you'll often see things on the news or media if you are signed up. You know, a flood alert has been issued for Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City, or if you're a bit further south, it may be something like Dundee and Angus. So they cover quite large geographic areas. We also do have flood warnings, but they're much more specific, much more targeted to certain communities where we have the capabilities to forecast the flooding. And you can sort of see the difference there in that bottom right screen. The flood alerts, you can't quite see the boundaries because there's quite a lot of them have been issued in that photo, but they're the big orange areas, and then our targeted flood warnings are the little red triangles. So you can see that there's a few been issued there. Kintore, Aberdeen, the lower part of the D, Stonehaven have been issued as well, and a couple down in Angus and then further into Tayside as well. We also produce what is known as the Scottish Flood Forecast. So that's available on our website, and that provides a 3-day outlook of flood risk across Scotland. So that's that other image on the screen there. So it's quite similar to what you might see in the Met Office app, but we essentially provide an area of concern, and that's coloured up depending on what the risk is. So from yellow to amber and through to red. So it's a really useful tool. You can view it on a laptop, tablet, on your phone. As long as you've got internet access and a web browser, you can look at it. So definitely recommend that you check that out, as it gives you the most advanced notice of flooding in Scotland.
Okay. So flooding is Scotland's biggest climate adaptation challenge. We just published an update to our National Flood Risk Assessment in December, and that shows that today around 400,000 properties across the whole of Scotland are at risk of flooding. And in future, due to the impacts of climate change, that's due to rise to 643,000 properties. It's quite a significant increase. And that's for flooding from rivers, surface water, small water courses, and the coast. So in terms of putting it just for residential properties or homes, 1 in 9 homes are currently at risk of flooding, and in future that could increase to 1 in 5 homes. And that's particularly due to increases in flood risk from surface water and small water courses due to the increased rainfall. This here shows the percentage of properties currently at risk in each local authority area. So within Aberdeen City, currently around 15% of properties are at risk. That's 20,400. And in Aberdeenshire, that's 19,800 properties, or 11%. And then if we look at the impact of climate change, it's going to increase. So within Aberdeen City, that would increase to 31,400 properties, and Aberdeenshire to 29,100 properties. So quite large increases due to the impacts of climate change there. And so that's the type of information that we use to work with local authorities in partnership to identify areas at risk of flooding and then make plans for how we can cope with that. And so we designate potentially vulnerable areas, and those are those blotchy brown areas on the screen here. And these are the areas that contain 90% of properties at risk of flooding in Scotland. And we are just now actually in our phase one of consulting on what actions you would like to see. So we're really encouraging communities to get involved and respond, and also kind of any actions that might already be ongoing on the ground of what your flooding concerns are. So for the 22nd of April, you can respond, and you get some more information as well on each of the areas on our website. Cool.
Okay, yeah, so I just wanted to speak about some of the flooding impacts that we have seen in the Northeast in recent times. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Storm Babette, October 2023. It really was an unprecedented rainfall event, particularly so for Brecon, which is the photo you can see on the left-hand side there. So there was so much rain that the levels in the North Esk did actually rise to a point where they overtopped the flood defences. So they went up and over, caused widespread significant damage to Brecon. Residents were evacuated as well during that event. There was loss of life in that event as well. On the North Esk at Kirk, one gentleman sadly lost his life. So it really was a significant and a devastating event. On the right-hand side there, it gives you a little bit more context about what happened, certainly in the month of October. So this is from the Met Office, and it's basically showing what the rainfall is in that month compared to the average for October. So anywhere that's brown was drier than average for that month, and anywhere that's blue was wetter than average. And the deeper or the more intense colour, the more extreme that is. So you can see pretty much all the way up the east coast of the whole of the UK, England, and up into Scotland. Lots of blue, lots of dark blue. And in parts of Scotland, certainly from that map there, you can see we had twice as much monthly rain that we normally have. And even from our own gauges, it's closer to 3 times the average monthly rain for certain parts of our certain gauges that we have in Aberdeenshire and Angus. So it really was a significant event. It could be quite difficult to attribute how much has climate change caused an event like that. You can't really just say this was definitely climate induced or related to climate change. Is it possible that this event could have happened without climate change? Was it made with more severe because of climate change? It can be quite difficult to try and unpick all of that. But on my next slide, this maybe provides a little bit of context. So this graph here is showing rainfall data from 1891. So the Met Office have rainfall records dating back to 1891 and for Angus more generally. So 1891 all the way up to 2023. And as you can see, it's a long record. The previous wettest day before 2020 was in 1927, which is that first sort of blue column you can see there highlighted. So by that point, there were 36 years of data. And that record then stood for a further 93 years before it was broken 3 times in the space of 4 years. So in 2020 and in 2022, and then further in 2023, that 1927 record was broken. So 3 times in the space of 4 years, all in this decade. So it gives you a little bit of impression that it can be difficult to say how much did climate change influence this event. But I think it's fairly clear. And certainly looking at that there, you can say fairly safely that we are beginning to see a lot more extreme weather. It's not just something that's in the future, it's affecting us now. And in particular, 2023, which was the highest rainfall recorded in Angus, that was 35% higher than the previous 1927 record. So it really was a significant event. And as we expect to see climate change intensifying, we're expecting to see flooding becoming more severe and more frequent as well.
So yeah, just some more examples of the recent weather we've had. So the snowfall and then the subsequent flooding in mid-January, and then the road at Pretoria, which I believe is still closed. It's been closed for like over 2 weeks now, I think, due to the flooding there. And some of the flood warnings that we had published. So there's quite a lot of information out there, different agencies working to improve how we deliver things, but it's quite hard. So the Scottish Government is delivering the Scottish public sector reform. And that's really where different public organizations come together with the vision of climate change and the climate change lens to try and have really that same aim to reduce the impacts of climate change. And we've got some pioneer catchments, and this is really just starting up. It's really brand new. And there's two pioneer catchments we've got. So one is the River Dee in Aberdeenshire, and the other one is the South Esk down by Brecon. And the Cairngorms National Park Authority is taking the lead on bringing organizations together on the River Dee. They've just recruited a catchment officer for that purpose, and SEPA is taking the lead on the South Esk. So this might be a nice idea for future talk, perhaps, once they've kind of gotten a little bit more on the ground to see how they're getting on. In terms of some takeaway points as well, we do publish a lot of our information on our website, so you can go there, check our flood maps, see are you at risk of flooding. You can have your say in our consultation as well, definitely encouraging all responses. And if you are in an area where we do provide flood warnings, you can sign up to receive flood warnings, or maybe you cross an area at risk of flooding on your way to college or work. And also you might want to consider preparing a flood kit. And we've brought some flyers along, so afterwards feel free to come and pick one. That's us, thank you.
Okay, can we start recording?